Eric, thank you for joining me today for this conversation. I've known you for a while now, and I'm curious to learn more about your work, Wisdomheart. Yeah, if you could share a little bit about that and maybe your background.
Sure. It's easier to start with the background in some ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up in Manhattan, New York City, and in a kind of a intellectual, artistic, progressive kind of family. So that was the milieu of questioning, exploring, and creativity were themes. But also achievement. It was a kind of a core value, which I didn't really know at the time. I was once in my adult years when I was I was a client of a Jungian therapist in our area, and I said, we were in a session, and he said, it's always kind of intense with you, Eric. It's like, I feel like I have to be like working all the time, like really be on. And I was like, okay, we all have a job to do, right? And he goes, it's like you have such a strong, like performance or achievement orientation or something. And I go, really? No one ever talked about that when I was growing up.
You were surrounded by that culturally, it sounds like.
He said they didn't have to say anything.
Yeah.
Exactly. They didn't have to talk about it.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, I never really, that was like, yeah, you're a fish. They don't mention ocean. We're in the ocean. No, you're just in this milieu, right?
Yeah.
And so that was my upbringing, but there was this other kind of dimension of life that always was very alive for me, and it was around the spiritual dimension and the sense of that there's a deeper current that's flowing through everything and through me and through everyone, and there's some kind of teleos, some kind of directionality around that, and I want to be in touch with it. And a lot of people when they're children have moments of these kind of communion moments and stuff with nature, with usually it's with nature.
Yeah.
And those were they always stood out for me as important and as kind of the most beautiful aspect of the way of being in the world, to feel that sense of unity and magic and radiance is really the language of from my personal language. It's just this radiance. And but that was not actually part of the conversation or the milieu. Okay. It wasn't even really welcomed in a certain way. More the spirituality or the religiosity maybe of my upbringing was more around sort of social justice kind of perspectives and not around inner development. Yeah.
What would you attribute that kind of difference within you? Like, it sounds like these little moments of time really kind of sparked an interest in spirituality or looking inward, especially when you didn't see that around you.
Right. What would I attribute to? These are just going to be, there's lots of narratives around, I mean, I attributed it to my nature, like my soul nature. I contributed to I attributed to that, whether we want to use past lives or whatever, that I came in with that impulse. That's just how I think that was just there. And that was a purpose, like we all have some kind of, I believe if we like pause and consider, we each have a kind of a question that we're pursuing at a very fundamental level, often in many different ways. And I think for me, the question, one way is like, what's this God? What's God? I think that was like a basic question for me. I can relate it to, I can, there's so many, I can relate it to the idea of core identity and like, who am I, kind of at that level, and not feeling satisfied, which definitely was supported by my upbringing with sort of the conventional answers.
So it was supported in your environment as far as
the idea of questioning. Which is a very Jewish kind of, practice.
Yeah.
And questioning authority. My parents were, anti-war during the Vietnam War, and they were progressive politically. So there was this kind of questioning of social constructs, definitely was there. So questioning was there. But it was really like, if you couldn't, bite into it or measure it on a scale, there really was nothing to question beyond that. Right? So I guess that was the upbringing. And in my upbringing, I like my biological father, my birth father, and I never met. So there, from a psychological perspective, there was this sort of identity uncertainty. They split when I was just a few months old, and the ways that the two families, quote, didn't work it out was that I never got to see him. Okay. And as a child, I had recurring dreams from when I was very young. I would have these dreams of sitting in the lobby of a synagogue, and in the dream I would be aware of my father was the rabbi walking up and down the empty rows of the synagogue, like making sure everything was in order. And I would wake up. This was about when I was 3 to 5. I would have this, and because my mom had had married again, and so I had my adoptive father, and I would wake up and I'd think, who is my father? Like there was a part of me that was having an understanding, but it wasn't spoken of in the family. So but I think that's symbolic. You could say it's symbolic of a deeper identity question of who is the father, like the Judeo-Christian kind of context. And that was alive for me for, those early years. And then I hit about 8, it kind of faded away, and more siblings came on the scene. But when I was about 14, a girlfriend gave me a copy of Mahatma Gandhi's autobiography, or recommended to me. And I read it, and I was like, he was talking about all these things of yoga and fasting and meditating. And I was like, this is it. This is, I think. I was like, there's something about this. Really, this is so speaking to me. And I started wandering around. I always visited the bookstores in New York City this is back when there were such things called neighborhood bookstores. Okay. And, I found this book, I think by this time I was like 15 going on 16, of Alan Watts wrote a book called The Way of Zen. And in it, in the very beginning, he goes, Zen is not a religion. It's not a belief system. It's a technology of awakening. I was like, that's exactly what I want. What is that phrase? Wow. That is it.
I was not aware he used the word technology back then.
Because it's like he meant it kind of not like we think maybe. Technology like a wheel is a technology, like a hammer is a technology. It was like and I thought, that is the deal, man. That's got to be the thing. And I grew up in the era of the hippies and stuff. And this kind of, there was this, and that was the beginning of the gurus and the roshis and stuff from the Zen masters from the East coming, and New York City, you know, it's like, that was a place where they landed. So, but there was only like 2 yoga centers by the time I was in New York. And I, you know, it was the summer of 17, and I called them up, and one didn't answer the phone. And there was no answering machines or anything. So, and the other one did. And it was that. So I went to the Integral Yoga Institute. Swami Satchidananda, who had spoke at what do you call it? Woodstock. He had opened Woodstock. He had this place. And I went in, and I should give credit to my girlfriend at the time, who had taken yoga and was encouraging me to do yoga. And I went to the yoga class. I did the yoga, and you do the shavasana, the relaxation at the end. And I sat up with my eyes closed, and I had this, like, you know, kind of a classical description of this opening of my awareness. And it was like a return to some things that happened when I was a real little kid, and just opened. And that was it. My life changed, like, at that moment. I went into the dressing room to change, and I was, you know, all of 17 and talking to this gentleman who probably was only in his 40s, but seemed very old to me. And I was saying to him, do you realize what this is? Do you understand what this is? And he was like saying, calm down, relax, you know. But I was just like, so open. And walking down West End Avenue in New York City after that with this gentleman, I was like, everything is radiance. I was just in this state. So that was it. For me, that was it. I'm on this. And that was it. Every day since then, I've done the practice for my whole life, you know, and organized my life around understanding this and living this and communicating it and trying to figure out, how do you do this in a modern world, you know? So that's a little background.
You're cracked wide open in that moment. Wow.
And then it's like, what do you do with this? Especially in the context of, again, the growing up milieu, which was, you know, it was basically go to an Ivy League school, become a doctor, a professor, or a lawyer, you know. But it's like, really, but how do you, there's something else going on here.
So
I did not apply to college. I went to a very fancy, like, high school, and they called me in, like, we noticed you haven't applied to college, and you need to talk to the headmaster. And so I went in, and he says, what are you going to do? And I was like, I want to join an ashram. And he was like, you could see him rolling his eyes, like, because all this, you know, the counterculture is coming to this place. And he's just like, really? But he looked at me and go, okay, well, then you go do that. Like, it was sort of this sort of reverse psychology. He was going to challenge me. And I was like, yeah, okay. But he did make the recommendation, why don't you just apply to some college and just say you'll go a year later? Because he was assuming But in any case, myself and one other student from that high school did not go to college the following year. He, of course, ended up with a PhD from Harvard much later. And he's like a super successful genius biochemist, innovator. I took a slightly different journey. And we both went to Boulder and Colorado. And I moved into, shortly after living there, I found this yoga class and Kriya Yoga, and I moved into the house where the people who were studying that, and that was like my little ashram experience. So that's my thing.
And so how did you get to Wisdomheart? So there's more of this story, I think.
So Kriya Yoga is the tradition that I'm trained in. Kriya Yoga was brought to the Western Hemisphere in the 20s, I believe, by Yogananda, Paramahansa Yogananda. He wrote a famous book called Autobiography of a Yogi. And so it's like a particular school, you could say, a particular flavor of a particular set of methodologies and philosophies. But all the yoga, all the mysticism heavily overlaps there. They each have their own cultural sort of symbolism, and they have slightly different methods, but there's a heavy congruence between any mystical school and any other one, whether it's Taoism, Kabbalah, Gnosticism, Christian, yoga, Zen. There's so much overlap. But the one I trained in was called Kriya Yoga, and it was a kind of practice that had been revived in the late 19th century by a gentleman named Lahari Mahasha, who was he broke a lot of the cultural patterns because he was a householder. He just had a regular job, and he was saying this method, this deep mystical spiritual practice can be fully investigated and integrated and realized in a regular, i.e., family, job, life. You don't have to go to the caves.
So this particular style of yoga that you were learning about really emphasized being able to be in the world and still be able to be on this path.
Definitely, it has that flavor and that value set within the whole school. There are groups that move more towards a monastic vibe, but there's this current of living your pathway, living a deep mystical path in the midst of the world. And that's the current that I tuned into. Because Yogananda, who brought it here, he had a special destiny because he had to come over from India to the United States. He didn't have a family. He was in this particular stream of the lineage, he was the only one. And he had a disciple who was an American named Shelley Trimmer, who also had a family and lived in the world. And then his student, who was my teacher, his disciple is my teacher, who has a Swami name, Goswami Kriyananda, who's also an American. He, was married, had a PhD, had, and was taught in the world. And then there's me. So there's 3 generations of Americans, Westerners, it's probably a better way to say it, which is another dimension of this practice, is that it is a technology, which is the kind of thing that can, it's not culturally dependent. Cultural frameworks and stories and language are metaphors that can be used to elucidate or to amplify or to describe the methodology. But the practice in and of itself is quite stripped down to you could say, as long as you have a human nervous system, you're good to go.
So you're in Boulder, and you're living in this community, and you're learning, you're studying, you're inquiring.
Right.
And I know from previous conversations, you've also had an illustrious career in corporate training.
Yes, that's good. Thank you for keeping the point on the point here. Yeah. So the question, it really was this kind of tension between get a job, be achievement oriented, do something sort of in conventional everyday life success for my family, and then Kriya Yoga. And my teacher, actually, when I first met him, he looked at me with my long hair, and I'm like, I'm going to be God consciousness. And he was like, go earn the soybean bacon. That was what that was his way of talking about, get a job, right? Yeah. Be real. And so that was like, how the hell do I do that really? I didn't really know. And I really floundered around for a long time. I always had an entrepreneurial streak, which also came from my mother's side of the family. And I'm actually somebody that I met through the Temple of Kriya Yoga, who was, anyway, he was getting his doctorate at Northwestern, and he goes, I just found this book called "What Color Is Your Parachute?" And it like gives you this method to go and figure out your gifts and your skills, and then and I said, I'm going to do that book, and I went to the book and filled out all the exercises, and then it was like, turn to page 182 or something. And I looked there, and it said like leadership training and development. And I never heard, I don't even know what that is. And so then I went back to this guy, and he said, oh, and he explained what it meant. It was like, you're teaching like mind states, skill sets, helping people become more self-aware, more effective.
Yeah. How old were you at this point?
At this point, I was, how old was I? So about 26, something like that.
So young and looking to get into leadership.
Yeah. And sort of like, oh, like this idea of training and development. Okay.
Yeah.
And I ran into, and then at that time I had a greeting card company with a colleague, and with a partner, and we made drawings, and we made greeting cards, and we distributed them all over the country. So I did a number of little entrepreneurial adventures. And he had just read a book called Frogs into Princes, The Structure of Magic. It was about something called neuro-linguistic programming, which was just starting at that time. It was a base, which has grown quite a bit since then, because it was just beginning. And he said, this might be good for you, Eric, because this is like how you can take any method and translate it into language that other people can use in their world. So you want to take yoga teachings and translate it into this could be good for you. So I was like, oh, cool. And I went to he said, there's a place just outside of Chicago where we were living. It's called the Midwest Center for NLP. So I contacted them, and I read a bunch of books, and a couple of years went by, because it was right around 28 years old. I went to a workshop retreat that they put on, and on hypnosis, and it was like, wow, I get it. Yeah, I get it. They have a framework for doing very similar kind of work, taking one state of consciousness, turning into another state of consciousness, bringing back the wisdom. Anyway, at that retreat, they for whatever reason, they were attracted to me, and they offered me a job, which was like, they needed someone to do marketing and just support their seminars. And so like, it was good timing, because like I was in between, and we had a kid, and David was like, you need a job, right? Okay. So I took that job, and so a little over 2 years I worked there, and I went to every program for every workshop, every retreat, everything. So I essentially was living in a workshop for years.
Yeah, you're immersed.
I was immersed, and we brought in all the famous people who were not yet famous, but the innovators in this field of NLP and Ericksonian hypnosis. And so that was my real graduate school. And I was very grateful for the work that I experienced there. And then I knew, okay, I get it. I get what training and development is. I understand how to do training. I've seen the genius masters. I get what they do. I know how to design a workshop now. I know how to take one idea and turn it into a language metaphor for someone else. Perfect. I'm going to get a job in leadership development. And we moved to San Diego, and I just went around and met all the heads of learning and development at all the companies in San Diego, met them, talked to them. And one of them, who was starting up a new division, said, "Hey, you know about meditation?" Yes, I do. I want to learn how. I want to learn how to meditate, and I want to have that be part of our offering. But I'm not going to tell anybody that. Okay. And I'm like, I'm your man, because I can just do it all in disguise, you know. That's why I spent the last 2 years learning. Anyway, she said, "But you're kind of a little weird, so we need to do a test." And so she brought a bunch of managers together, and I did like an hour of work with them. And she said, "Okay, you're hired." Boom. All right. And that was really my real graduate school, because I went into corporate America.
Yeah.
In a military industrial complex company, Fortune 100 company, and people I'd never been around these kind of people before, ex-military, all engineers, very, very straight and linear, but beautiful. I learned a lot about groundedness and practicality,
And you felt they were very receptive to what you were sharing with them?
They taught me how to translate the material to their needs. And yeah, the first workshop didn't go that well, but I adapted quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I did the exercise when the young woman was sobbing about her father and everyone else was freaking out out of the room, I realized I need to dial this down.
Especially, this was the 70s, right? Probably.
Totally.
Yeah. So totally different environment. And what were some of the things, because I assume you were able to kind of interject some of the wisdom that you had learned up to that point in your life. And because I know you've talked to me about sharing like mindfulness concepts with them, which was still very new age, new technology at the time.
Yeah, it was. I learned there in those environments, it was we could do reflection exercises. So it wouldn't be, not meditating, not guiding, not even telling them to close their eyes. It was just like more like, in a way, what I learned from Ericksonian hypnosis. Be like, just tell a story, because most of you have had a time in your life when all of a sudden you felt like everything was working, whether you were at home or maybe you were in nature, maybe you were in a sports situation where there was this flow that was coming through you and you didn't have to think, you could just act spontaneously, correctly. So that's a guided meditation, if you will, but I don't have to tell them to close their eyes, or can just. And then it's like, so let's take a moment and remember that. And then in the worksheet, write down some of the qualities of that experience now. And so they would be in their own little worksheet, So I learned how to invite people to explore their experience at a deeper level without mentioning, in a sense, that we're doing that. We're just thinking about stuff, It's like
beautiful. Yeah.
And then if they talk to each other about it, that creates a resonance in the room. And then the question is, how would having more of that in your work be useful? So then you kind of, they self-prescribe in a way, and they self-diagnose as well.
Yeah. And so you did that for a while.
I did that in the corporations, but it was like, I was hiring consultants and going to workshops led by consultants and people who were speakers and writing books. And I realized that's what I want to do. And I left the General Dynamics. I went to a much more progressive company and my boss, after a year there, said, "You know what? You want to be a speaker and a writer and a consultant. I'm going to just hire you half-time, and you don't want to work here. You want to be that." And I was like, it's true. So it worked. He kind of liberated me and supported me by giving me this contract for 2 years as a half-time consultant. And I got to build a business on my own with other clients. And so that was a gift of Terry Dearstone, that he made that possible for me.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah.
And then now here we're at Wisdomheart.
And so Wisdomheart came
Yeah.
out of the first iteration of the consulting business was called the Walden Group, after Thoreau's Walden Pond sort of. And then I had a partner, she wanted that name, so that's fine when we split. And I said, Davey was like, you should call it Dharma Consulting. It's like, okay. So that was one step closer to kind of coming out about what I was doing. Dharma is a word from the Sanskrit for, that means purpose, or the inner call that we follow and embody, and the deep, you could call it, it's the deep code in a person or in a group that needs to be unpacked and expressed. So Dharma Consulting, and that was like the heyday of my corporate consulting. I wrote books and had big clients, and still felt like, and this is, mindfulness was still not yet the new black. It was just, it was really like in the stress management space, not in the heart of the real work, And I really didn't want to be positioned in the stress management space. I wanted to find a way to be doing the work with the C-suite and the real whatever, the pay is better and the conversation is sometimes more impactful, because if a small shift in the C-suite can ramify positively or negatively, but I was hoping positively through thousands of people's lives. And, but for me, it was, there are aspects of the teachings and there's practices that really, I still don't think have a home in that context. And there's an aspect of the teachings that really are profoundly individual. And it's about your own awakening. And coaching can lean into that more than, say, consulting.
Well, early on in our conversation, you actually talked a bit about practice, and I'm curious, you seem to be moving in that direction right now in the conversation. So tell me a little bit more about how you see practice. And I know it's very key and central to your own life. So.
Yeah. Practice is so, if you want to get good at anything, you have to practice it. Okay. And so that is, and that was that initial Alan Watts impulse of like, there's a method, right? And you can, and there's one of my values is mastery. Anyone who's a master in any domain, I just like super admire, that they've taken the time to be devoted to whatever the discipline is, and they let that discipline shape them in a deep, deep way. And so in Kriya Yoga, there's a core set of practices that are meditative in nature. And while I said, they're a technology, they're a technology that understands that the human embodiment is more than muscle and bone, that the human embodiment is even more than neuroscience. It's even, because that's like the frontier. We're discovering, there's these amazing things, and it is amazing that we have this capacity to shape our neurology. As Richie Davidson of the University of Wisconsin, student of the Dalai Lama, great researcher in this interface between contemplative practice and neuroscience, says, through engaging lightly quoting him, through engaging with non-measurable, non-material mind states, we can reshape our measurable neural networks. Nobody knows how that interface is happening, but it's clearly, and this is moving us toward what the yogis were the masters of, which, because they were phenomenologists. They were just investigating inner experience, and in such a deep and refined way, describing subtler and subtler structures that constitute the human embodiment, and discovering ways of strengthening, balancing, healing those subtler and subtler structures. And so the practices work with what can seem to the conventional or mind, work with metaphors. From the yogi's perspective, it's true. Everything's a metaphor, you know, including neuroscience and including physics.
Yeah.
Everything's a metaphor in the sense of everything's an expression of something that is real but ineffable, I would say. And so the practices of Kriya Yoga involve they involve things that are tangible, like breath and sound, but they also involve sensing into your own inner being at subtler and subtler levels, and working with those, sometimes the currents, they call them, or the channels in some systems, working with these centers of identity or centers of awareness. They call them chakras. In translation over into this culture, Shelley, I mentioned him, a disciple of Yogananda. He was a scientist, physicist. He called the chakras mass energy converters. They're these centers of awareness that can convert energy into mass, and can dissolve mass back into energy. So that's saying, you can take, another way to say it psychologically is, you can take your personality and dissolve it back into presence that's impersonal, and then recapitulate and revivify your personality now with a new perspective. So that there's a series of practices, and they're all on the internet. There are no secrets anymore. Just type in Kriya Yoga practices and they're all there. Okay. That's not the secret. The secret isn't like I get to buy, an exercise bike or something, no. But if you do the exercise, then you'll discover the secret.
Yeah. So the secret is in the practice itself.
Exactly.
And the embodiment. Yeah. Because you mentioned embodiment earlier. So maybe share a bit about your current work, because I know you're,
Okay, so Wisdomheart is our online. It used to be online and in physical world, but right now we're still hunkered down with COVID. So it's an online school of that teaches the principles and the practices of Kriya Yoga through this image of the wisdom heart, which is to say the wisdom dimension of the practice, which is to see through all of our conditioned perspectives into a vast and open, undifferentiated sort of radiance. And then the heart dimension, which is to incarnate or to embody that into a loving presence in your everyday life experiences. And so we have courses, and there's coaching, and there's a community, which is like a membership, for people who want to be in the long-term kind of want to be in a regular conversation around these principles and practices. And when you're in the community, kind of like the one you and I are in with George, you get everything's included. It's like it's all, it's like all you can eat.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And we only focus on one meal at a time, but the whole buffet is there.
Yeah. And maybe
Online.
to back up just briefly, because you've mentioned us and Davy.
Davy's my wife, and we met at a Kriya Yoga retreat in Boulder, Colorado. And so we've been together for a long time, 50 years. And we teach together, and we've studied together, and we've been learned together. And it's a nice combination. She, maybe I bring the wisdom sort of more, and she brings more of the heart in a certain way. We try, she brings a lot of wisdom. I hopefully bring some heart, but there's nice male, female kind of dimension that people report is very helpful to receiving the teachings. Because there's an aspect of it. There's an aspect of that is, we pick up a dimension of the understanding through being with people who have cultivated that perspective and integrated that revelation. And it's very helpful to be around people who are doing that, because our own body and our own nervous system picks up and learns at a very pre-verbal level just by being around people like that, and colleagues and stuff who are into it. Super important. So that's one of the things that Wisdomheart offers, is a place to be with, like-minded souls, so to speak, and to be around some teachers who've been doing it for 50 years together, and to kind of explore what does it mean to live the awakened life. It's not like there's really not like there's a secret answer. It's a question. What does it mean to live the awakened life? Now,
Yeah. Wow. Beautiful. And who would you, because I know we've had other conversations where it's Kriya Yoga that you're trying to promote at this phase of Wisdomheart, and I know we've spoken a bit of the challenges of getting in front of people in a way that's like relatable, or like this is what they're looking for. Because in some ways you're very fortunate. You were presented and you knew this is what I'm looking for many decades ago. And so it sounds like that's a big part of your current work too, is exploring how to carry on this tradition, how to introduce and invite people into this type of community.
Good. I appreciate that reflection, because that is my growing edge right now, which is, I think, for me, so it's this artistry of, I'll say for me personally, it's around, first of all, my growing edge is to not water it down so that I think they will think it makes sense, right? In order to sort of, so that's where I can get into my own way in terms of the communication, right? I do think my part of my dharma, part of my purpose is to be a translator, but to find the language that will be that has life. When you find the metaphor that's vital, not to just repeat marketing slogans that have become popular in the mainstream memes of consciousness. and not to, because I'm not, culturally Indian, not to kind of adopt some of those frameworks, which are not congruent or authentic, maybe would be a better word, So I feel blessed in the sense of I'm the third in the, and Shelley particularly with his scientific sort of framework modeled how to take these teachings and speak of them, like I said, chakras or mass energy converters. Like that's another metaphor, and talk about the practice from a in a language that might communicate to modern people. Anyway, that's my I don't even know if it's a dilemma, but it's my path right now. And it's trying to figure out how to, and I don't think there's an answer. I think it's just a constant, it's an iteration to say, here's what it is. I mean, when I look at the people who get attracted to Wisdomheart, I like to say it's not their first rodeo, that they've been exploring, much like I said, I had this sense from a childhood, but they've been exploring for a long time in their life, the question of a spiritual communion, of a deeper center of identity. And the question of how do I live that though in my marriage, in my business, or in my, profession, whatever, in my culture. And that they have a sense that there needs to be a contemplative practice, a meditative practice, sort of, that is at the heart of keeping that inquiry alive. So that's the kind of person that seems to do best. And they also have an interest in not just getting a hack, not just getting a method, a quick fix kind of, but are interested in the ongoing exploration, because I know in 5 years, I'm going to have that same question. It's going to have a different expression. And so I'm interested in how to articulate that just straight, clear, honestly, and sort of bless and release my New York marketing karmas from my past, the madmen that I grew up around who were like, could sell anything to anybody. I need to, keep the beauty of their capacity to use language, but purify out the snake oil dimensions of that archetype that is in me for sure.
Yeah, it sounds like integrity is a big part of your work now, like just feeling our integrity. Yeah,
absolutely.
So what are some projects that Wisdomheart is working on right now, like offerings or?
Yeah, I'm working on taking the Bhagavad Gita, which is this basic core text of India, that strangely yoga text that's situated on a battlefield. And I'm working on how to organize what I'm calling it a spiritual leadership academy, so that for people who have a sense of they want to lead, which is to say, make a difference actively in the culture, but that whether they're in a company or not is irrelevant, in their family culture, whatever, that they want to take on a leadership role from a place that's led by their own awakening. That their own awakening is going to be what kind of opens the pathway of that gift and that offering. And that's what the Gita is all about. And So working on organizing that.
And this is a group program, or
this would be a group
course?
program.
Group program.
Yeah, it would be a group program.
Mm-hmm.
I think that a lot of the benefit of that would be being with other people who are in that inquiry.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing.
All right, great. So how can people find you if they're interested in connecting with you?
Sure. Yeah. People can find me at wisdomheart.com.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then
great.
You can look around. You can sign up for the newsletter if you'd like, and we send out a weekly, hopefully inspiring teaching and some my video, sometimes written. And you can find me on Instagram at wisdom.heart. Got to put the dot in, otherwise it goes somewhere else.
Somewhere else. Okay.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Eric, for sharing. Yeah.